Well, welcome everyone to our first engagement workshop sessions of the Under One Sky Conference 2021. If we haven't met yet, I'm Ruskin Hartley. I'm the Executive Director of the International Dark Sky Association. I'll just point out we do have one of our board members here with us, Kelly Penderley from down in Australia, West Australia, about as remote as you can get, I think, right, Kelly? Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited for this workshop, engagement workshop with Landon Bannister. He is going to be talking about, I think, a really important aspect of this work, which is dark city walks. We talk a lot about giving star parties. I think the other aspect of this is actually introducing people to interesting good and bad lights and what's going on around in their neighborhoods. So really grateful for Landon to join us. He has been working in the lighting industry for over 20 years. And he's a real passionate advocate for the important role that light plays in influencing health, human emotion, and how it all relates back to the natural world. He's on a chapter management committee for the Illuminating Engineering Societies, Australia, one of the Australian branches down in Tasmania, so he's part of the body that's helped setting the standards. He is the founder of Dark Sky Tasmania, which is where he's joining us from today, from I think Hobart, Tasmania. And he is on the board of the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance, a wonderful collaboration and partner with the International Dark Sky Association, doing such incredible work to build awareness throughout Australia, New Zealand, and the broader Pacific region. So Landon, again, is going to talk to us about dark city walks. Here's a smaller group. So Landon, let us know what your pleasure is, whether you'd prefer to take questions as we go along, or whether you prefer people to hold them to the end.
Well, I think with a group of this size, I'm really happy to have questions as we go along. So
that's perfect. So I would suggest that if everyone can go on mute, and then if you want to ask a question, raise your hand, and I'll be watching out.
Sounds good.
Take it away, Landon.
All right. Thank you, Ruskin. Look, before I kick off, I do have to just say we are speaking to you from Lutruwita, which is Tasmania, but I would like to just acknowledge the traditional owners of this land and their ancestors, but also their connection to the stars, because our traditional custodians of this land are literally known as the world's first astronomers. So they have a very deep connection, and they considered the land and the stars to be one. So just wanted to get that in first. I'm going to call this Dark City Walks. You can call them whatever you want. This is just my name for it. I'm going to share my screen now and kick off. And as we said, questions are very much permissible as we go along. Share screen. Always takes a little bit of time to get going. And just let me know, Ruskin, when you can see that, please.
I can see it. It looks great.
Excellent. It always just takes that time. Right. Well, pretty much the format here is I'm just going to basically, what is a dark city walk, what the objectives are, give you the tips for beginners, because if you haven't done one before, it's a bit of a, I've made a lot of mistakes doing these, so it's important I'll share those mistakes with you, so hopefully you don't make them. Also, what to look for when we're setting them up. How do we go about what is it we're trying to find them when we're setting them up? If you want the learning outcomes that we're looking for when we're planning these things, and then, well, let's do the Q&A as we go through. So hopefully we won't have to worry about that by the time we get to the end, because you're all going to be experts and you're all going to be so confident that you can go out to your own towns and just run these sort of things without any drums at all. I think what I consider a dark city walk is literally that. It's just a guided walk around your hometown after dark that demonstrates how the lighting that we add to our cities impacts the way we use them and also the environment. And I'll go on to say that, it's really important that they show both good and bad examples of lighting, sort of where we'd like it to go, what we don't want it to look like. But really, this is all based on the premise of seeing is believing. And I guess the why of dark city walks, and Ruskin sort of touched on it, but of all of the things that we've done at Dark Sky Tasmania, the one thing that's opened the most doors is doing these walks. If you can get the right council person along, the right politician, the right city planner, it's amazing that you can talk to them as much as you want. You can tell them about the plight, all of the impacts of light pollution and why this is important. But when they actually get out there and just see what's going on and realise what it is that this is about, that's when we've been able to convert them, and that's when we've been able to get them onto our journey. So I think they're incredibly powerful tools. So as I say, Dark City Walks, my name, call them whatever you want, I don't mind, but the objective is obviously the same. So I was going to start with a poll though, Ruskin. Can we launch a poll? Do I have to get out of my share screen for this, don't I?
I can launch the poll. Let me do that.
Let's do that. Just out of interest, have you ever run a Dark City Walk before? Well, this is good. I was hoping we'd have at least a yes in the audience, because that way we can draw on your experience as well as mine, which is great. I think that was about it, wasn't it, Ruskin? It's 15 responses. Excellent. Now, the person that has run the Dark City Walk has to put their hand up. Who was that? Actually, can't see the. Andy. All right, right. We keep Andy in mind. That's good. Andy, do you want to unmute yourself and just give us a quick brief on how many you've actually done?
We've only done one, but well, actually, we did two. That were kind of repeats of the same walk for some people that couldn't make it the first time. And we have another one planned for sometime in early December.
How did you find the first one? Did you find it productive, worthwhile?
Absolutely. The key was having the mayor and the police chief participate. So that made a huge difference.
Excellent. Awesome. All right. Well, hopefully there's some stuff in here that you haven't sort of discovered on your own yet. And please, if you do see something that I've missed, please pop up and share with everyone else, Andy. Thanks.
Sure.
Right. If we jump back in here, hopefully I'm good to go. We are. So what are you trying to get out of a Dark City Walk? Is pretty obvious that educating the public about the issue of light pollution is a no-brainer. But it's also to show how much light is being wasted in our hometown. We often talk about that IDA figure, we say 30% of outdoor lighting is wasted. As a lighting person, I think having done these in my hometown, that figure is actually much higher than 30%. When I actually sit down and look at what's going on and assess what's going on, I think in my hometown that it actually is higher. So it kind of really benefits us when we do these things. And this is really important. We need to demonstrate how light pollution detracts, not enhances the safety in many of our towns after dark. And the reason that is so important is pretty much the primary argument that we face when we talk about addressing light pollution, and reducing the levels of light pollution, is that people always automatically think it's going to make a space less safe. And it's really important that we can demonstrate that in actual fact, it's going to make it enhance the safety, enhance the amenity, and that more light isn't the answer. So that's the real key part of what we do. And sort of as we said before, you've got to show the good and the bad. It's important as you go along to show practical solutions and demonstrate just how easy light pollution is to solve. As we always joke, it's just as simple as flicking a switch. When we talk about the tips, this is absolutely the best thing I can tell you. Like, forget about all the rest of the tips. This is the one. Make them fun. The more fun, the more engagement you get with people, the more people learn. So you have to remember, if someone's giving up their time, they're coming along, look, yep, they're there and they probably have a bit of an interest in the subject already, but if you can capture that audience and really make it an engaging evening, not only will they take on board the learnings, but they'll go away and they'll talk to others and they'll spread the message for us. And so that's really one of the most important things that we strive for when we're doing them. For the duration, we found an hour is really good. We've run them for longer, we've run them for less. Once you get past an hour, they start to drag on. when you're down into really sort of short periods of time, you don't tend to get enough information across. So that's a really good sort of, I guess, framework for you as an hour. That's what we found. Safety is important. When we do our walks, we do a safety brief before we head off. We always cross at designated pedestrian crossings. You can see I'm wearing a high-vis vest in the background there. So we do obviously take that importantly and understand your legality. So the one that I've actually got a Dark City walk planned after this, it's part of a festival here called Open House, which is run by the Architects Institute of Australia. And they set up the walk, they did the ticketing, and therefore we fall under their indemnity insurance. If I wasn't doing that, I would actually have indemnity insurance under Dark Sky Tasmania for this reason, because it is something you want to be very careful of. Another tip is, which might sound silly, is to make sure you have a physical address. We've had places before we said, oh, meet in front of such and such building, but teenagers, if they can't put it into their phone and Google the address, then they don't know how to find something. So it's we've had that feedback, so it's a good one. I always like to have a final destination too that allows for some social interaction afterwards. Me, I love a glass of wine. I usually find a bar that's reasonably quiet, that has space. But the reason that's good is when you've got a large group of people, there's always going to be people that want to know more. And it's really good that you provide them that opportunity. And sometimes it's good just to have that space, or else you might be, just standing out in the cold for a couple of hours, and much nicer to get into somewhere a little bit more relaxed and have that opportunity. And we like 2 people to run a walk. It helps to pace the walk, to bring up the rear. And I actually use my second person, my volunteer, to help me with a few of the learnings as well. That's a map of a walk, probably one of the first walks that we did. When we're doing these things, we suggest groups of 25 people. The one I'm doing tonight's got 30. The one I did last week had 35. But the reality is that the less people you have, which sort of sounds a bit counterproductive, the better it is, because the more intimate you can make them and the more you can connect with your audience. And this is really important because you don't want to be shouting, you don't want to feel like you're shouting. And if you can make that more of an individual connection with people, you've got, again, more chance of getting your message across. So we really like that 25 is a really good mix. And to say even less than that's really good. Once you get past that, it's hard to make those individual connections. And walks are dependent on the quality of your stops. You can see here, I think I've got 14 dots on that page. That's all stops, but some of them are very close together. We normally look for somewhere around about the 6 to 12 mark, and that makes it a good mix between walking and talking. So you're walking and you're moving your way through the city, and you want to have that sort of, I guess, that good mix. Don't have really big gaps between your key stops. We find that probably the most important thing, other than making it fun, is the flow. And so we spend a lot of time making sure we get the flow right, so it just feels like it's at a good pace. It is an amble, not a race, and that there's a good mix between walking and stopping. One of the ways to do that is to encourage questions when you're walking along. It's another good reason for having 2 people, because you can answer multiple questions at a time. And when it comes to those stops that we're about to go through, or the key learnings, again, it's about the flow. So we mix them up, we add them. You guys will have your own ideas, and please share them with me, because I'm always interested in expanding what we do and improving what we do. So the flow, again, is really super important. And this might sound like another no-brainer, but guilty of this once. Make sure you start a Dark City walk after dark. You always plan these things months in advance, and of course, it might be dark at 6 o'clock when you're planning it, and in 3 months' time, when you go to the walk, it's not dark for another 2 hours. So we not very nice standing around with a bunch of people waiting for it to get dark. So do check the time. Right. I guess this is where it gets into the learning outcomes, and this is where I really love people to jump in as they feel necessary. And so what we're talking about here is what I guess we're looking for when we're planning our walk as a key learning outcome to get across to people. So, and obviously from a lighting background, these are going to be very lighting focused. Right, the first one. glare is the enemy of good lighting. And I word that way because that is a lighting principle. Applies during the day as well as during the evening. And it's this probably classic image that I'm sure most people have seen many times and probably used themselves in presentations to people. And, it's that classic example of when we have glare, it really inhibits the way that the eye works. So we actually set this up as a real life example. Every town or city will have that one really bad floodlight lighting onto a monument or a building. It might be a really bright wall light. Sometimes we can even find a really just ridiculously glary street light or bollard or anything like that. And I'll always have my volunteer or my assistant wear all black, and I will place them behind that light and start my talk that way. We do the introductions, we talk about everything, and I have the audience with their back to that light source, and then I get everyone to turn around. And the assistant obviously sitting there, no one can see them, they're dressed in black, and then we introduce them to what is the greatest device in working out whether you've got good lighting or bad lighting in your town, your hand. And we get everyone to hold up their hand, and on cue, when everyone holds up their hand, the assistant starts waving, and we have the great reveal. But it's that classic example of getting back to what we talked about. One of the key learnings is that we add light to our city for basically wayfinding and safety. And whenever we have glare, we're essentially creating safety issues. And so I think it's really important because we talk about that wasted energy being, uplight, and people can understand that and think about light going up. But we need to also think about glare as a light pollution. It's one of the important components of light pollution. So I think this is probably, this is the one we like to start with, and it starts with a really big impact, and it's got a bit of wow factor, and it's worked well for us. And we've probably done about, I think we're up to about 40 of these in the last 5 years now. So, and we come onto that in about sort of the second or third year. And since then, it's just, it's the gold standard. It's what we look for to start a walk because it works so well. Wasted uplight is the easiest one. Everyone can find this in their sounds. It's everywhere. We all know it. It might be an in-ground in a ground just lighting straight up like we have here. We all see the wall light on a building where half the light goes up, and I often talk to people where we see the situation with this light on the wall. That light is for people. People are ground dwellers, so it makes sense that light should be directed towards the ground. And in this case, about 30% of the energy being generated is hitting the ground, and which means literally 70% of the light wasted. And it's those type of conversations that get people to start to think. This is a real life park in Sydney, Australia, but it's amazing how many times you can find that wasted up light straight into trees, and imagine how much it's hitting the trees, and imagine how much that light keeps going up. And that can open up conversations for particularly you ecologists out there, Kelly. As Teresa Jones will say, you've essentially just destroyed habitat. It's essentially an insect's home that they'll no longer be able to live in. So those type of examples can have some really good impact. Too much light is a bad thing and gets back to, again, this safety issue. And this is another one that I find quite easy to find. I find lots of examples of this, because what we're finding, or what we're looking for here, is trying to find a place in your city or your town that has too much contrast. And we know that when we overlight a particular area and the contrasting area doesn't have as much light, it's that learning, if you want. And the way I always word this is that the eye can handle incredibly bright amounts of light. I mean, if we think about being outside under the sun, it's hundreds of thousands of lux almost. We can also handle very, very low levels of light. So being under a full moon, we can actually see quite well, and that might be as low as 0.3 of a lux. But what the eye can't handle is both at the same time. And the problem we have here is that deer in the headlights, and if you can find these situations, you can put people in there and you can walk through them, and good idea if you can actually get someone to go ahead on their own, because people always feel safe in groups, and remember, you're going to be in a large group, but to actually separate someone out and say, well, does that feel safe out and under those lights? And that realization that too much light is actually a bad thing and actually starts to detract from safety and amenity is a really powerful learning. So I would suggest that, these first three that we've touched on, these are ones that you should try to find in every single walk that you do, because they tend to have a lot of power, I guess, behind them. The next one we talk about is how much light do we need? And there's no right or wrong answer to this, I guess, question. I, being a lighting guy, actually have a lux meter. So if you have one, even better, because what I'll always do is I'll find a street like we see on the right, and then I'll find somewhere like we see on the left. It's Copenhagen, if anyone's interested. But just to take a light reading in a space that you feel very comfortable in, that you think is a good level of light without being overly bright, and to take one in an area that you feel is overly lit, is a really good way to compare, because for me as a lighting person, I always take that measurement in the vertical plane. And then I talk about why verticals are so important, because of course, we walk around, we don't look at our feet, we're looking at the world in a vertical plane. So I'll take the reading in that, but it's not uncommon for us to find a really nicely lit space that people feel very comfortable in, and find another space that's probably a little bit overly lit. And the comparison in levels can be sort of 30 to 50 times brighter, which of course means 30 to 50 times more energy, 30 to 50 times more light pollution. Andy, did you want to jump in at this point?
Yeah, I've found this whole concept of vertical light readings and horizontal readings almost, not intuitive. So could you kind of explain that for everybody?
Yeah, from a perception of light, I guess there's a lot of emphasis in standards put on lighting horizontal surfaces, which is basically lighting the ground. If you think about how your vision works, you've basically got a plus or minus sort of, or just say 30 degrees for the sake of how your field of view works when you're standing up. So if you look around, just take a normal view of the room you're in at the moment, just have a quick think, how much of the ceiling you're seeing, how much of the ground are you seeing, and how much of the walls are you seeing? So when we're moving through space, when we're walking around our towns, it's actually the vertical element that's really important to how bright something's perceived and how well something's perceived. So that concept of vertical brightness is a really important one, because you'll find really good spaces and really good examples where there's, and this is a pretty good example, there's actually not a lot of light being directed to the horizontal plane in that Copenhagen square, but the vertical spaces make it feel very bright and very safe. You take a reading in that square and it's actually extremely low level of light. So this idea of throwing a lot of light at the ground is a little bit counterintuitive to making spaces safe. Does that make sense?
Excuse me, can I just chime in? Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I disagree with that, because we have much bigger field of view horizontal than vertical. So that doesn't make sense to me. We have bigger, I think it's 150, something like that, for horizontal, and 100 maybe for vertical. So we see much more in the horizontal left and right than we see up and down.
All right, we might agree to disagree on that one, because I've never enjoyed and I've never found perception of brightness from lit horizontal surfaces. It's almost, to me, a waste of energy, a waste of lighting energy to throw huge amounts of light at the ground, because it does throw off, if you want, that, again, that balance of contrast between what's going on with the verticals. This is a really good point though, and thank you for jumping in, because whenever you do these walks, and I was going to mention this a little bit later, there will always be people in your group that have a difference of opinion. There will always be people that will prefer the street on the right than the street on the left. And you have to be very aware of that, that we all see the world differently. Our eyes, obviously, are all very different, and our perception of the world is different. And so be prepared that there will be people that actually really love bright overlit spaces, and there'll be some people that, you know, are really on your journey and quite happy to pull light levels back. And there's no right or wrong, and particularly when we're taking light levels, I always say that there is no right or wrong answer. What we try to say is that it's just about asking the question, does it need to be 50 times brighter? Maybe we could be somewhere where 10 times brighter was okay, and we can find a happy medium. So it's a interesting discussion point more than anything. We'll probably get some more backlash on this one as well, but this is appropriate use of colour. I have a lot of situations with the work that I do where people come to us and they want to use colour, has to be colour changing. We want to light everything up colour changing, and we always ask the question why, and they, you know, maybe it's for Bastille Day, or maybe in Australia we have, you know, Breast Cancer Day, everything turns pink. It's always, they're not quite sure what they want to use colour for, but they want to use it because the technology's there. And because of this, we do see a lot of inappropriate use of colour. I usually try to find this as a discussion point more than anything, and I get just as many people disagreeing with me on this one as I do on light levels. But it is a good discussion point, and I think there's a lot of mixed messaging with colour, and it can be considered a form of clutter. When we have lots of colour changing and lots of motion going on in our cities, it can really detract from the visual messaging of a city very quickly. Warm light sources versus cool light sources is one that we always touch on. I'm not sure how many people still have a lot of high pressure sodium or low pressure sodium in their cities. We do in Tasmania, in Hobart and in Launceston. And the reason this is quite important is we have people's perception of warm light, and we all know that we want people to use warmer light sources and less blue-rich light sources. But they have a perception of that murkiness that comes with high-pressure sodium. And so one of the things that we often try to find is a area lit with sodium next to an area lit with, say, some warmer LEDs. And this isn't very particular warm LED. This is 3000 Kelvin in the foreground with sodium in the background. But it is an interesting one when you start to point out the importance of colour rendering to our visual perception of space. You can see in the foreground that the greens are green, that the path has a distinguished colour between the lawn. If you're in that space, the trees look green, the trunks look brown. And of course, in the background, everything's got that lovely monochromatic brown wash across it that comes with the sodium sources. So we do try to find that as one of the learnings on our walks. And it's good to talk about the importance of colour rendering, and that the newer technologies can be very, very warm. We're thankfully now starting to see 2200 Kelvin come into Australia as a viable option for nighttime lighting in terms of an LED source, but with colour rendering. And I think that's another nice one to look out for if you can find it. Whenever we get into this warm and cool, we generally take the opportunity to really stop here and talk about why we like warm light. And I'm probably not going to preach to you guys, because I'm sure you all know, less likely with the circadian disruptions. We generally talk about the sky glow component of short wavelength light versus long wavelength light. We talk about there's less likely to impact wildlife at this point. And I also talk about the human connection to light and how we generally have a preference for warmer sources than cooler sources, particularly in lower levels of light, which is what we have during the evening. And I sort of always relate this back to, the light sources that we've adapted with as humans, and sitting around campfires for hundreds of thousands of years and telling our stories, and how that, if you want that history, that light history within our genes is basically built into each and every one of us. And it's why we have a preference for warm and cool. Again, you'll always have someone in the audience that go, I prefer the cool light sources. But I think those two streets paint a really good example. Lots of people in one, none in the other, and that's actually a street in my hometown of Hobart. And quite often I'll also look for a bar or something nearby and talk about the reason bars like themselves warm is exactly that. And it's about encouraging people to hang out in that space after dark, because of course this is when they do most of their trade. But when you apply that back to cities, if we want to encourage nighttime economies, if we want people out and about, having this cool, rich light is very counterproductive to that. And we find council people start to think when you talk about nighttime economies, because it's such a buzzword for them at the moment, they all want to generate income during the evening for their towns and cities. And lighting it very cool, very blue rich is one way to guarantee not to attract people to a space. Hopefully everyone can find those sorts of examples in their towns, and if you can't, then you've got a good town to start with, which is a good thing. We have way too many streets that look like that one on the right in Tasmania, which is a very unfortunate. Light where light is needed is another, I guess, good example. We always talk about wasted light, spill light. We have this classic example in Australia where our street lighting is one size fits all. And so whether that street light is going across a 6-lane highway, a 1-lane road, whether it's on a 3-metre outreach, no outreach at all, it's basically got a footprint that's designed to light everything. And of course you have this classic situation, and we find these all the time. It's just a matter of picking the best one, really. And what we're really talking about there is that it's a street light. So this sole purpose of that light is to light the street and the path. And it's doing just as good a job of lighting the tree, the front house there, the roofs of those houses. And that's energy waste. That is literally what we're talking about. It's a graphic example of light pollution. You can talk again about how any wildlife that may have inhabited that tree is now gone. We could talk about that if you lived in that house without full block out curtains, you might be experiencing some sleep deprivation. It's a pretty graphic picture, and we unfortunately again find this a really easy example to find. This is, believe it or not, a real installation that happened in Adelaide recently, and we talk about light where light's needed. And I like these examples because the street's really super bright. Oh, sorry. And but you can actually see on the building facades just how much light is lighting the front of the buildings. The reason that's a good example is that the traders in this street, once this street lighting installation happened, remembering the council were trying to attract people there after dark, actually started to drive everyone away. And of course, the shop fronts couldn't actually compete. So the shop fronts, to actually make any of their products stand out at night, had to get brighter and brighter. And it became a daylight type environment. So a good example of light where light's not needed. I have, I don't know if anyone knows of a guy by the name of Mark Major, Spears and Major, but he posed this question to me many years ago in a talk he was giving, the question of does it need to be lit? And again, this one can be a little bit controversial, but Mark was a passionate Londoner, or is a passionate Londoner. This was sort of years before, I guess, light pollution was on the agenda of lighting designers. But even back then, he sort of understood that as a city, if it has to have an identity at night, then you have to ask the question of does it need to be lit? And most cities in the world actually have no rules or regulations about whether you can do facade lighting on a building or not. It's pretty much up to the building owner of what they choose. We've got a classic example of a building that's probably one of the ugliest buildings in Hobart. That's it there. And they decided that because it was so ugly, they couldn't really do anything to it other than put this blue ring around the top of the building. And that can be seen from 5-6 suburbs away. It can be seen from, kilometres and kilometres away, and it just glows really bright in the night. And collectively, if you were to talk about what's important to Hobartians and whether that's an important building and should it be lit at night, well, the answer is no. But the point of, I guess, doing this as a learning, if you can find the right building, find something that's been lit up that probably doesn't really tell a story about your hometown, is that it does pose the question of, do we need to actually put rules and regulations about what we can light, and how do we control what the identity of our city looks like at night? And the truth is, it has to happen through policy. we use this example, as I said, it poses a lot of questions again, and I think debate's really good. It's really healthy. This is clearly throwing a lot of light pollution off at the same time. But the adverse of this, or I guess if we don't ask the question about what needs to be lit, is that buildings will eventually start to compete with each other. So, okay, they've lit their building, but I want to attract tenants to my office and my building's more important. So then the next building lights itself, the next building lights itself. And before you know it, you've got all the buildings getting lit up. And then you become a little bit like Hong Kong, where once it starts to expand, the only thing left to compete on then is brightness. And then they actually have to get brighter and brighter and brighter to stand out in the night skyline. So it's important to ask those questions in any municipality about, does it need to be lit? We find this one, again, sadly, all the time, light is for people. This is a really important one. No animal has ever come up to me and said, can I have some light at night, please? The only reason we put lights in is for us, it's for humans, and you will always find this classic example of an empty car park that's still lit up at night. And the point there is that, with technology now, it's that whole idea of active control. So we have the ability to put on motion sensors, timer switches, you name it, dimming controls, where we can dim things back after certain periods of time. The technology is there, but we don't really use it very well. And this, to me, is a classic example, again, of light pollution, where it's there to light for human use of that car park. And of course, we've gone past the hours of whatever that building is being used for. There's nobody there, but we've left the lights on. So I find this a really good talking point when we're doing our walks, to find those areas where you've got lights on and no people. So that light is for people is a really good learning. And of course, we talk a lot about lights here, but we have to remember there's digital displays. Whenever I find one of these digital billboards, I always get people to say, well, when you go home tonight, go into your lounge room, turn your television on. If you've got one, turn out all the lights and just watch where the light from the TV screen goes. And of course, your ceiling lights up, and that's what this is. There's so much light pollution off media screens. I'll go back to this image we shared before, but there's another classic example there of just signage lighting. Again, it's another light pollution source. We all know this, but it's really good to start posing these things and pointing them out to people, because people have never really considered it as part of the general public. Over there, we've got a car park, and I can promise you, as bright as that car park is, it's an open car park, lights spewing out everywhere. There's hardly any movement in that car park after dark. So could they be on motion sensors? Could they be on timers? Could it be dimmed down at that particular time? These are good questions to pose. And of course, we've got an office building in the background, and let's be honest, all of those lights are probably on for the one cleaner that's going through the building floor to floor to floor to floor. Again, this idea of automated controls and understanding that light pollution isn't just about light fittings, it's coming from all these other sources as well. The final one we'll touch on, this is a learning that we're lucky, I guess, to have a good example, or unlucky to have a good example where I live in Hobart. I have found this hard to find in the other places that we've done dark city walks, but if you can find one, it's a good one. Jevons paradox being that when we have a introduction of a highly efficient technology, rather than actually savings, what we find is an overuse of that particular technology. And in this case, what we're talking about is LED. So energy efficient, so inexpensive, that inevitably what we know is that people aren't actually saving a lot of energy with LED, they're just using more light and making spaces brighter. And if you look at the top of that street, that is also an LED rollout that happened in Hobart in 2013. And the bottom of the street is an LED rollout that happened in 2019. And so in the space of 6 years, the street got exponentially brighter. It's quite obvious when you're standing in and under it. And the question there is, what actually changed with how people perceive light? What changed with the way our eyes work? Of course, they didn't change. Our need from lighting didn't change. Nothing changed. We just chose to make it brighter. And again, this is adding to that story of light pollution. So that is a good one if you can find it. If you're looking for a new installation, and a new installation where you can still see an older installation side by side, and it's got exponentially brighter. So if you can find that one, it's a really good one, because it just asks questions, why are we making it brighter? Why does it get brighter? And of course, we walk people into that space, and does it feel any nicer? And about 99% of the people we take through that street really don't like being in that street. So it's for us, it's a really good one in Hobart that we use. And you'll be pleased to know that that is the end of it. I've put our Dark Sky Tasmania email there because, as I said, we do have sort of all of those, I guess, learnings are in note form, and we are more than happy to share that with people. So maybe touch base with us there. And I'll stop sharing.
Great. Well, I'm not sure if people can hear me because my computer is glitching at the moment, but thank you so much, Landon. That was a wonderful presentation. We have a few minutes left for any questions that people might have.
Can I ask a question of you, Andy?
Certainly.
How similar would that align to what you've been doing?
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of good ideas. One thing that's different, we were taking people up on this path on the river levee and stressing the importance of keeping light out of the river. And there's part of the levee path that's lit, and they're planning to put on more lights on the levee. The existing lights already bleed all the way down the riverbank, all the way to the river. And there's other lights on bridges that cross the river that are even more problematic. But I'd say one thing that was different, we intentionally started people on the path that was unlit. So we started them in the dark. And I think that's useful because you can explain the physiology of the eye and how, once you're dark adapted, there's no way these people were dark adapted. But we were in a relatively dark place. But, explaining how much longer it takes to adapt from light to dark than dark to light. So that's one thing. And then we just, polled the audience for ideas. It's like, well, does this feel safe? Why doesn't this feel safe? What would make it more safer? And, brought up alternative ideas, like painting reflective stripes. This path was for bicyclists. So, bicyclists at night already have lights. So just bring up the issues, and I handed out handouts of the IES IDA 5 principles. So we went over those 5 principles, and I'll say this was inspired by a talk at night, not Dark City night, but Dark National Park talk that Chad Moore gave at a national park nearby, that I'm working with them to become Dark Sky certified. So that was kind of the inspiration for doing this. He just went down the 5 principles and didn't even have a light meter. So yeah, I was just kind of talking it over with people.
Awesome. I love that idea of dark adaptation. That's something we should really look at bringing in.
And then just to go back to this horizontal vertical. So I find it confusing because if you're holding the light meter vertically, you're getting a vertical reading, even though if the light source is, several meters down that way, it's coming at that fairly horizontally. And that's my understanding. And when you're holding the light meter parallel to the ground, that is horizontal reading. Have I got that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Can I jump in there? Just around the use of a sky quality meter, you cannot point it horizontally, ever. Okay, so that does not give you valid data. The only way you can use them is to point it vertically.
I'm using a light meter, Kelly. I haven't watched your video yet to know how to properly use a sky quality meter. But if anyone wants to use a sky quality meter, there's a great video online somewhere that Kelly's put together to show you exactly how to use one, because I've only just got one.
So we find this happens a lot with sea turtle biology. The biologists run around the beach and aim the light at the, the hotels behind the beach. And there's been a lot of paper published with that. So myself and Chris Kyber and Travis Longcore actually wrote a paper to just correct that and to just make it clear that you cannot use them that way. You can only use them vertically. So that's online if anyone wants to see the paper as well.
So just one comment on the horizontal versus vertical illumination, and this comes from a lighting designer in Europe called Karolina Zielinski. She was working in New York when the Ground Zero Memorial was being planned, and the police, they were working with the police there, and the police said, well, we're going to have a lot of people here, so we need to light it up very brightly. And the designer's kind of response to that was, well, that will kind of defeat the whole ambiance of the place that we're trying to go to. So they actually went to places in New York, they kind of did what Landon said, and they measured the sort of horizontal and vertical levels of illumination there. And what they discovered was it was the ability to sort of wayfind and see the entrances and the exits on the vertical planes. By lighting those, they're able to drop the light levels on the ground and kind of create that sort of sacred space that had much lower light levels, that they don't have any problems as a result. But they did it by going out and actually assessing the types of places that people were congregating and feeling safe and understanding what was actually going on there. And I think it's just another example about, on some level, lighting is really simple, and on another level, it's extraordinarily complex. But I think I just wanted to close, Landon, just kind of thank you for kind of giving a framework for allowing people to go and have those experiences. And I think most importantly, have those conversations. And I know everyone here knows that once you have seen a bad light, there's no going back. You will see bad lights everywhere you go, and then you can be an evangelist for pointing out the difference between good and bad. So thank you again, Landon. I know Landon's planned to write up, I think, a short kind of guide to this that we will be able to share with people as well. And we'll be certainly sharing a link to this recording. Our next session starts is the Europe, Middle East, Africa, and India session. And if I'm looking correctly, that starts at 10 a.m. Universal time. That is 2 a.m. on the Pacific coast, and what looks like 5 a.m. on the East Coast, and 10 a.m. Universal time. And you'll have a link to that in the attendee package that was circulated. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see many of you back in a few hours. Thanks so much, Landon. It was fabulous.